to the cloud. Recording in progress. Okay, Mehmet. People are still checking in, and I am admitting them as they show up.
Okay, thank you, Dina.
You bet.
Well, good evening, everyone. This is In Reach for Astrotourism, and Bill Kast is going to be talking most of the time. But we have a bit of a format here that would allow other members here to share some of their experiences. So after Bill Kast finishes his portion, we are going to allow.
Excuse me, somebody needs to mute. If everyone except Mehmet would mute their, thank you. That would be excellent. Thank you.
What we are going to do, different from the other cases, is first of all, you could write your questions on the chat. That's number one, as Bill talks. And I will navigate some of those questions, maybe not all of them, but then we are going to have the opportunity for few other members to share their experiences by screen sharing. You have to raise your hand to tell me that you have some slides to share, some screen to share, and I will go from one person to the next in that fashion. Okay, and just bear with us. We may have some technical challenges as we navigate this, but it will make it a bit more interactive and fun as well. So let me introduce Bill Kast. Bill has been a member of DAS for the last 5 years and has been trustee for the last 2 years. Actually, his interest in astronomy started when he was 10 years old. So his interest goes way, way, way back. He's originally from Chicago, but moved to Denver, and you may call him a native of Denver. He has spent about 3 decades as a truck driver interstate, and using that opportunity with a telescope in his truck, going to all sorts of dark sites and observatories everywhere. He has a couple of things that I like to mention. He has a very interesting website. If he doesn't mention it, I should mention it, Binocrane. I visited that and enjoyed it immensely. So I recommend them to you guys. He is very much into binoculars and binocular mounts. One of the interesting interests that he has. He retired about 4 years ago, about the same time or similar time as mine. So he might be as old as I am, or maybe younger. Basically, that's all I have to say about Bill. He may actually give you more colorful experiences that he has throughout his astronomy journey. Bill, the floor is yours, or the screen is yours.
Thank you,
Mehmet. You can start sharing it.
You know, that wasn't supposed to happen.
You have to choose the screen sharing and then choose your slides, I guess.
Okay, I had something pop up on my screen here that isn't supposed to be there. Oh, there it goes.
Is it PowerPoint?
Okay, share screen. Okay, I got it now.
Once you have PowerPoint, you have to also.
Okay, am I sharing now? You see the Zoom front page there?
Yes, but where is your present? Okay, got it. You can put it in presentation mode if you like.
That's what I'm working on. There we go.
Good, perfect.
All righty. Okay, astrotourist and astrotourism are fairly recently coined words. There's several online dictionaries available, and I found one that had the best definition I found is right here, and it's a two-part definition. Number one is a person who pays to travel into space as a form of recreation. And the second definition is a person who travels with the intention of observing astronomical phenomena. Now, as far as traveling into space, you know about these two guys. They've been in the news a lot lately, Jeff Bezos and Richard Branson, who are sending people to the edge of the space on their respective vehicles. Price tag's a little bit high, though. I know I can't afford it, and I don't know many people who could afford that ride into space, but I do applaud their efforts in starting to make this type of service available. But there's been plenty of publicity about them, and everybody knows what's going on there. So we're going to concentrate here on the second definition, which is a person who travels with the intention of observing astronomical phenomenon. And I'm using the term astronomical phenomenon rather loosely to include several things. Basically, I find that there are three reasons to leave your backyard, telescope in the backyard, and pack up your car and go somewhere else. The first one is to escape the plague of light pollution and find a dark place to observe. A lot of people are packing up every summer and going to big star parties like Okie-Tex and other star parties around the country, and it's making quite an impact as far as tourism is concerned. Another reason to leave home is to observe special events. This is reason two. Special events and phenomena such as eclipses, planetary transits, auroras, and meteor showers. And this is nothing new. It goes back to 1761, the transit of Venus. The French and the British were vying for being the predominant astronomical research powers, and they both, England and France, both put together expeditions to places as far as Siberia, Newfoundland, and Madagascar to observe this transit. And then about 100 years later, in 1878, this is just another example, Maria Mitchell, famous astronomer from the East Coast, packed up a bunch of her Vassar students and came to Denver to observe the solar eclipse. So people have been traveling to observe phenomenon for a while. And then another reason, the third reason to travel, is to visit historical observatories and astronomical sites around the world, such as Stonehenge, and here's Yerkes Observatory in Wisconsin. So it's making an impact. It's been noticed by Forbes magazine, and they've run a series of articles on their website about astrotourism. Sky and Telescope magazine, as well as Astronomy magazine, both sponsor tours to witness aurora and eclipses. And here's another example. Smithsonian Institution also is booking a tour to the eclipse that's coming up around Antarctica in December of this year. But if you look here, 14 days, $13,995, and that does not include your airfare down to Argentina to get started. So that's a little bit out of my pocket. Most of my observing has been done on 4 wheels or 18 wheels, as the case may be. And my astronomical discoveries have been aided by my day job, driving a big truck all over the country. I started that 4 decades ago, I started driving over the road, and in the 4 decades that followed, I spent probably a total of 25 years on the road. The rest of the time I was working local jobs. But anyway, this gave me an opportunity to see a few things that I ordinarily wouldn't have seen. In that time, I covered nearly every mile of the interstate highway system and a lot of state and local highways beside that. And in those years, I logged 1.2 million miles, verified miles logged in my logbooks, which is enough to take you to the Earth and Moon, a round trip to the Moon twice, and make a good start on the way back. And along the way, you're bound to see, when you travel that many miles, you're bound to run into something interesting once in a while. And here's that Easter egg that I said I was going to plant. And my first real adventure came in 1995. I was had delivered a load in Los Angeles, and I was at a truck stop out in Ontario waiting for dispatch. And my dispatcher called me and told me to bring my empty trailer down to a customer in San Diego and drop it off there and bobtail back. Well, bobtailing back means driving an 18-wheeler without the trailer. It's essentially an overgrown pickup truck. Somebody needs to mute there. Anyway, on the way down, I saw this sign, an exit for Palomar Mountain. And that immediately set off bells in my head. I thought back about the first astronomy book I had as a 10-year-old child that had pictures of the big telescope at Mount Palomar and pictures of the dome, and also pictures of Yerkes. I also was a stamp collector, and I had the stamp with the illustration of the Palomar dome on it. And I wanted to be one of these people down here looking up at that big giant telescope for my whole life. So when I saw that sign, I decided that I was going to take a stab at it. Well, back in 1995, we didn't have the benefit of Google Maps. We were all working from paper road atlases, and I had no idea. All I saw was an exit for Palomar. I had no idea that it was 16 miles away as the bird flies and 32 miles by truck. And if I had seen a more detailed map like this one, I probably would have been discouraged and not even tried. But I persevered and climbed up to the top of Palomar Mountain in that big truck without the trailer. And this is someone else's picture. When I got to the top, there's a gate at the entrance to the observatory. Well, it was already after dark. The gate was closed, and the sign was a little bit different. It said astronomers are working, and the observatory is closed to the public at night. And here's their current hours, 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. Not to be deterred, I parked the truck, grabbed my camera. You couldn't see the observatory dome from the parking area. It was completely obscured by pine trees. Now, not to be deterred, I grabbed my camera and climbed over a fence, barbed wire fence, climbed over the fence and hiked in to the point where I could see the dome. I set up my camera on a tree stump. I didn't have a tripod or a cable release with me, so I set the camera up on a tree stump and made several stabs at time-lapse photography, where I would open the shutter for a second or two and then let go. And you can see the stars are a little bit blurry, but this one didn't turn out too bad. It's completely dark, and the observatory dome is being illuminated by moonlight. And this has been a picture that I've always treasured. As a matter of fact, this is before digital cameras. This was on an old 35 millimeter film camera. And my next adventure came in 2003. I was in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and my dispatcher sent me to the Walmart Food Distribution Center in Los Lunas, New Mexico, to pick up a load of groceries going to a Walmart store in Show Low, Arizona. And my suggested route was to go south on Interstate 25 to the town of Socorro, and then jump on US Highway 60 and go west to Show Low. Now, I knew that the Very Large Array was down there somewhere, but I wasn't even sure if it was visible from the road, but sure enough, it was. I parked there and got out, and I saw the sign for the visitor area. It was 2.5 miles down the road. I was not sure what kind of reception I would get going down there with a 53-foot trailer behind me, or if there would even be room to turn around once I got there. So I pretty much stayed where I was at and wandered around and took a few photos to remember the occasion. And then I went on to complete my mission for Walmart. About a year later, I was on a regular fleet assigned to the Costco distribution center in Phoenix, Arizona. And I was servicing the stores in Colorado. And our normal route went up through Flagstaff and across the Navajo Nation into the Four Corners area. Well, on one trip, I got as far as Kayenta, Arizona, and the truck broke down. And they had to send a tow truck after me and tow me 150 miles back to Flagstaff, Arizona. And they dropped the truck off at a shop and took me to a hotel where I had to wait 2 days for parts to arrive and repairs to be made on the truck. You know, I knew that Lowell Observatory was there. I checked it out, and I knew it was up there. So I took a hike on foot up to a Lowell Observatory. It was about a Lowell Observatory. It was about 1.5 mile hike, and you can see the dome up here for the big telescope, and it was quite a hike up the hill, but it was worth it. No, these pictures, I didn't have a camera with me. My camera was locked up in the truck back at the shop. So these pictures were borrowed from Wikipedia. They're all public domain pictures. And here's the big observatory where the 24-inch Clark telescope is stationed. Now, when I saw it, it wasn't this pretty. It was before they did the recent restoration, and it was pretty rusty, and the paint was peeling, and they didn't have it lit up like this. But I did get to see the telescope, and after seeing that, we hiked up the trail to the smaller observatory, which housed the astrograph that Clyde Tombaugh used to discover the planet Pluto. Now, I say the planet Pluto, maybe you're one of these people that thinks that Pluto is not a planet anymore. So I put this in here. Pluto joins the dwarf planets. But that was a really great experience. I really enjoyed that, seeing that old telescope and seeing all this historical astronomy up there. And in 2014, we're skipping ahead, I was also running Costco. This time I was servicing stores in Albuquerque, and I had my 12-year-old grandson with me for a couple of weeks that summer. And I knew this was out there, the Barringer meteor crater, or meteorite crater, Ron. That's thanks to you. It wasn't a meteor that made the crater, it was a meteorite. I had been by this sign hundreds of times, well, dozens of times anyway, Meteor Crater Road off of Interstate 40. I never quite got the nerve to get off at that exit and see if I could go see anything. But having my grandson with me, I wanted to show him something special. So we got off the road, and right off the road is a convenience store. You can see this is a kind of a geodesic dome for the store there, but they had a large parking area where I could park the truck. And I went in and asked them if I could drive my big truck down to the meteor crater and get to see it. And they said, sure enough, they got parking down there. So we hopped back in the truck and proceeded down the road at a safe speed. 50 miles an hour. Unless you're a meteor, then they have a speed limit of 26,000 miles an hour. And sure enough, when we get there, they had a nicely paved parking lot with plenty of room for RVs. And there was another truck there at the time. I parked right next to him. And we got to see, they have a really nice visitor center there. It's very modern, very well kept, and they have interesting displays inside as well as outside. And after we saw the movie inside and toured some of the exhibits, we took the tour up the edge of the crater and got to stand on the edge of the meteor crater. Now, I did say my grandson was 12 years old, and he is indeed 12 years old in this picture, already standing a head higher than me. He's 19 now, and he's all grown up. This is about the time in December of 2014, I found an ad in Costco for a Celestron telescope for $150. And I hadn't had a telescope since I was a kid, and I decided I would buy it. I liked what I saw, and within 6 months, I caught aperture fever and went up to an 8-inch Dobsonian that I picked up for a good deal on Craigslist. And it was also at this time that I discovered that there was more in the sky to see than the moon and Jupiter and Saturn and the planets. And I began my Messier quest to observe all 110 objects in the Messier catalog. Now, I found out that there was room in my truck. Now, this is the inside of the sleeper berth area of the truck, and there's an upper bunk. I was a solo driver, so that bunk up top rarely got used. I pretty much used it for storage, but it made a nice safe spot to carry the optical tube of my Dob around. It was a little tough getting the base for the Dob up there, but I found out that it would sit on the passenger floor of the truck right in front of the seat and made it really easy to get in and out. Now, I had a telescope with me. That doesn't mean I could stop anytime I wanted, anywhere I wanted to do observing. I had to wait for the perfect storm. I found this out just from experience, that there were a certain set of circumstances that made for ideal observation. First was the phase of the moon. I was interested in deep sky objects. So as all of you probably know, when the moon is out there, there's not enough contrast in the sky to really see them well. So I had to wait for proper lunar phase. And then, of course, there's the weather. I couldn't be trying to look through the clouds. It was also dependent on my route. All of my routes didn't go through dark areas, but a lot of them did. If I had a route that was going through a dark area, I'd be looking for a place to legally and safely park my truck so I could get out and set up the telescope. And then, of course, this was all dependent on my schedule at the time. A lot of times I had to get where I was going. I didn't have time to stop, but there were times when I hit the perfect storm and I got to see everything. Now, one of my frequent routes was in between Denver and Los Angeles. I was back and forth countless times between those two cities. About halfway across is in east central Utah is the San Raphael Swell, which is a geological formation. It's just just west of Moab, Utah by 20 or 30 miles where it starts. And this area was all ocean bed millions of years ago, and tectonic motion raised everything up about 5,000 feet, and then erosion cut lots of canyons and valleys through here. It's a beautiful area. Let me back up one slide here. This area, okay, right about here is Green River, Utah, and right about here is Salina, Utah. In between Green River and Salina is 100 miles of virtually nothing. They have signs out there warning you that you better have a full tank of gas because it's 100 miles to the next gas station. Well, no gas stations, no towns, no lights. It's an ideally dark place to stop. And there are plenty of rest areas up there along the way where I could park my truck. The only problem with the rest areas is that they're all lit up. They would have lights lighting the area for safety. And a lot of times those lights, especially when they changed over to some high intensity LEDs, it got really hard to see there. Later on, I found out in the same area, there's an exit on the east end of the Swell for Temple Mountain Road off of Interstate 70. You get off in this area here. It doesn't look very big on the map, but there's room to park an 18-wheeler in there. And they have a little bulletin board posted with information about the BLM land policies. But I parked in there. I made at least 3 visits there where I recorded Messier objects, and I made 12 new unique Messier observations at that location. And I plan on going back there someday when I can spend a little, pitch a tent and spend a little time. Another observation opportunity arose when I made a trip from Laredo, Texas to my temporary home in Lubbock, Texas. And along the way, I found this little rest area with no lights, no bathrooms, just a place to park and a couple picnic shelters. But as it turns out, it was in between Eden, Texas and Ballinger, Texas and Paint Rock. And if you look at the light pollution map, it's in a pretty dark area right there. That's about Bortle 2, which is just about as dark as it gets. So I set up there, dragged the telescope out of the truck, and spent about 3 or 4 hours that night making observations. And that was the only time I stopped there. But at that time, I managed to record 6 new Messiers that I had not seen before. Another trip that I frequently made was from Los Angeles to the Dallas-Fort Worth area, sometimes to Houston and San Antonio, but they all went through this area right along the New Mexico and Arizona state line, which down here on the light pollution map, it's real close to a Bortle 1 area. So I figured this can't be too bad here. And I looked it up on the clear dark sky star charts. And you'll see down here, right by the border, there is a cluster. Each one of these little flags on the map is a unique reporting site for the clear dark sky site, where they report observing conditions for the next 24 or 36 hours. The color of the flags indicates the inherent darkness of the area. And I was curious why all these flags were clustered down here. So I thought that might be, it's about halfway in between Dallas and Los Angeles. I thought it might be a good place to start. So my plan was to get off Interstate 10 at the last exit. If you're going west, the last exit in New Mexico, here's the state line to Nevada, is for New Mexico Highway 80, which goes south into southwestern New Mexico. There's also a little ghost mining town there called Steins. But my plan was to get off the highway, head south to New Mexico Highway 145 and go east to 338 and back to the highway. And if I did not find a place to park the truck and do some observing, I would continue on to Lordsburg, where there's a truck stop where I could spend the night. Well, as it turns out, at the intersection of Highway 80 and 145 was a really large area paved with crushed rocks. I don't know if it was limestone or what, but it was a pretty nice area. And as it turns out, it was a county service area where the county road trucks would park their vehicles and dump loads of stone and asphalt and things they needed there. But it was a really nice area, wide open, plenty of room for me to set up the telescope. And I did notice down here, you can see some little pixels down there that are actually buildings that kind of caught my curiosity. got the telephoto lens on the camera and took a picture. And I wasn't quite sure what I was looking at. They looked like they might be migrant labor agriculture camp or something. I wasn't sure what it was until later on. I looked back at the clear sky chart and found out that what I was looking at was this black flag here, which is Astronomer's Paradise. And those little buildings that I thought were migrant labor huts were actually roll-off roof observatories that are leased out. Here's one that's leased out to Astronomy magazine. I guess they have a permanent presence there. In Granite Gap, New Mexico was what I called it because the mountain nearby was called Granite Gap. I made at least 3 visits there, at least 3 while I recorded Messiers, and I know I've stopped there other times where I didn't make any unique observations, but in the 3 stops there, in Bortle 2 skies, really dark, I recorded 26 unique Messier observations, which was nearly a quarter of the observations that I needed for the Astronomical League program. So I really like that spot. And one more spot that I discovered a little bit later in my career, I was getting close to retirement, but I was doing a lot of trips in between Los Angeles, California import centers to regional distribution centers up in Reno, Nevada. And I'd go up through I forget the name of the valley, Owens Valley, which this is kind of a side comment. Owens Valley used to be an agricultural paradise. It's a desert now, but all the people in Los Angeles have green lawns as a result of the water that they diverted from that valley. But as you cross the state line into Nevada, you climb up into the mountains to Montgomery Pass. And it's Bortle 2 bordering on 1 there. It's really dark sky. And I set up there several times. I made at least 2 visits there where I recorded unique Messier observations, and really a great place, clear sky. And for being in the mountains, the seeing was really great, not too much turbulence. So I really liked that spot. And in 2016, I made some changes in my life. Number 1, I joined the Denver Astronomical Society, which was the best move I ever made. I was getting close to retirement and I wanted to have a bigger scope. I was dreaming about this baby for a long time. I dipped into my 401k and purchased a 15-inch Obsession Dobsonian mount and some matching eyepieces, which cost a pretty penny. You know those green eyepieces. If you know those, you know they ain't cheap. The only problem I had is getting this telescope into the back of my beat up old Buick that was ready for retirement too. So I traded it in and got myself an economic hatchback, which I dubbed the Starship Kia, and decorated it up with a little bit of flair and some personalized plates. And as it turns out, this is probably the most expensive astronomical accessory that I ever purchased, but it was worth it. The telescope folds down into a nice compact area. I built a wooden box to go over it so I could pack all my camping gear around. And this is the Starship Kia. I've had a lot of places, as you'll see in the coming minutes here. I've made probably, I estimate, somewhere between 30 and 50 trips out to Klein, half of them with this telescope. So that's tourism, you know. It's a 100-mile round trip that I have done many times. All those miles add up. In 2017, I took the Starship Kia up to Castle Gardens, Wyoming, during the new moon to do some dark sky observing. And oh yeah, there was an eclipse that weekend too. So my son and I got to see the eclipse, and that was a 350-mile round trip. So that was Astrotourism. And later on that year, I made it down to my first star party. I went down to Okie-Tex, and that was really a lot of fun. Here's my camp. All this stuff came out of that little car, this big tent, little tent, and this tent with the telescope underneath it, all packed up into the little Kia. And these are some of the big scopes that were around the area. I took a walk-in tour and that's Bortle 1 down there, and did some really, really fine observing that trip, and had a good time. In December of 2017, I took a trip to Chicago, Illinois to visit my brother who lives in the northwest suburbs. And I took a day off and went up to Yerkes Observatory. As it turns out, that was a pretty fortunate visit, because by October of 2018, 8 months later, the University of Chicago discontinued their support to the observatory and pulled out for it. And it's been closed since then. They're doing some extensive remodeling at this point, and they plan on having it open to the public again, probably in a year or two, but they're really doing a job up there. They managed to raise some money and get some work done. But what I got to see was of course, the big dome and the 2 smaller domes. Some of the architectural details in that building are amazing. And of course, there's the big 40-inch Clark telescope, biggest refractor telescope in the world, that went in there in, what was it, 1894 and 1895, and to date it is the biggest operational refractor telescope in the world. Here's the control panel that they use to position the telescope. And here's the inside of the library. They got a really beautiful library in there. And they have enough exhibits up and down the hallways to keep you busy for a long time. When it opens up again, I cannot recommend this too highly. It's worth the trip, and it's really a historical observatory. In March of 2018, I went down to visit my cousin who's a snowbird and has a winter home down by Harlingen, Texas. On the way back, I took a little side trip and spent the night at Big Bend National Park, and it was a fantastic night. Well, you can see the list of things that I saw, and at 29.5 degrees latitude, you're a full 10 degrees south of Denver's latitude, which means that everything in the southern sky is 10 degrees higher. I took that opportunity to look at these high number Caldwells. Now, if you're familiar with the Caldwell observation list, they are listed in ascending order from the most northern latitude down to the southern. So these are all the southern ones that I'm looking at that are not easily or even possibly observable from Denver. I also saw some Herschels and did some planetary observing. But the star of the night up here was the M78, the Omega globular cluster, and words fail me to describe this. Looking at it through the big refractor, which is parked under the tent here, looking at it through the 15-inch refractor at low power. The only way I can describe it is like looking at a fully blooming chrysanthemum. There's more detail and things to see in that cluster. You can see it from Denver, but it's just barely above the horizon. Down here, it was 15 degrees above the horizon, which doesn't sound very high, but it was actually visible with the naked eye from that location. And I'd like to get back to Big Bend and spend more time there someday. Yeah, later on, I went back to Okie-Tex for a second round, and the telescope never even made it out of my car. I was there for 4 nights waiting for the clouds to clear and the rain to stop. And you can see they had a bulldozer out here pulling out RVs that were stuck in the mud. You can see the mud here along the road. It was basically a miserable experience, but I did get to pal around with a few people and meet some people, so it wasn't a total waste. And on the way back, I stopped at a friend's house down in southeastern Colorado in Beulah, and the clouds cleared by then, and we did some great observing from his front yard. This is also about the time that I began my association with Chamberlain Observatory, first as a volunteer for public nights, and recently I've been certified as a telescope operator on the 20-inch Clark Segmuller telescope there. And this kind of sparked my interest in historical telescopes and the big boom of telescopes that occurred at the latter half of the 19th century. They were popping up like mushrooms on a summer morning after a rain. There are telescopes all over the country. And just last month in July, I had a family event to attend in Chicago, Illinois, and I decided, and I have a son and grandson living down in Ohio, so I thought I would combine the trip with a little bit of visiting observatories. My first stop was in Crete, Nebraska, at the Boswell Observatory at Doane University in Crete, Nebraska. Now, it's a tiny building, a tiny observatory, but I was given on short notice, Janet Jeffries agreed on short notice to give me a personal tour of the observatory, which was really great. You can see in the foreground their transit telescope. And upstairs under the dome is their, I think it's an 8-inch. Yeah, it's an 8-inch Clark that was, the lenses were figured in 1884 and sent to Professor Godwin Swayze. And he actually constructed the optical tube, and the equatorial mount was manufactured by a clockmaker in Des Moines, Iowa, but it is Clark optics in there, so it's a Clark telescope, and it's been pretty well preserved. They've got a nice little observatory going on there. And here's the time ball that stood on the top of Merrill Hall in Doane University in Crete. And you can see it up here at the top of the building. And here's the observatory down here. And they had basically a telegraph key down in the observatory. Every day at noon, they would hit that key and the time ball would drop, and people all over Crete, Nebraska would set their clocks and watches. They even made a little bit of income selling time to the railroad before the U.S. Naval Observatory took that job over. Here's an old woodcut engraving of Boswell, the way it looked when it first went up in 1884, I believe it was. And you can see there's a weather vane on the top here and an anemometer. Well, Professor Swayze used the telescope in the observatory for his astronomy classes, but his real love was meteorology and studying weather phenomenon. Now, this weather vane on top had a shaft that went through the roof, and he had an indicator dial on the ceiling inside of this room that could tell him what direction the wind was blowing without going outside to look at it. And of course, the anemometer was giving him wind speed. And he helped set up the Nebraska Weather Service. They had several observing stations around the state of Nebraska, and they were all connected by a telegraph network. And Swayze was inside this observatory collecting data and keeping records on the weather in Nebraska. This caught the attention of the federal government, which established the U.S. Weather Service, which eventually became the National Weather Service. But a lot of the groundwork set by Swayze and Nebraska was used by the National Weather Service in establishing that organization. After I visited my family in Chicago and attended my event there, I went to see my son and grandson down in Ohio. And after I left them, I moved on down to the Cincinnati Observatory. Now, this has been on my list for a long time, especially since I found out that our Professor Herbert Howe, basically the founder of Chamberlain Observatory, did his post-grad student work as an observer an assistant observer at this observatory. To get up there, it looks like the Google Earth car showed up after somebody had a bad day and knocked this sign over, but we're real close to the intersection of Observatory Avenue and Herschel Avenue. And I always wondered, ever since I saw that sign, I always wondered how many people in the neighborhood know who Herschel Avenue is named after. And then I started wondering, well, is it named after William Herschel or is it named after his son, John? And I finally decided that in recognition of the contributions made by female astronomers, that it was actually named after John's sister, Carolyn Herschel, but I guess we'll never know. Had a nice tour of the inside. Here's their, I think I gotta turn my notes here. Yeah, this is their 16-inch Alvin Clark telescope, which was installed in 1904. And even though it's over 100 years old, this is what they refer to as their new telescope. And it's really beautifully preserved. Their old telescope is the one I was really interested in. This is the one that Howe used in his tenure there. And this is a 1845 telescope that was built in Munich, Germany by the firm of Merz and Mahler. Now, back in 1845, they weren't making any really decent telescopes in the United States. So when they founded Cincinnati Observatory, one of the founders, I lost his name here, took a trip to Europe and went telescope shopping and ordered this scope. It came back to the United States by steamship, to New Orleans. And from there, it went on river boat up the Mississippi River and the Ohio River to Cincinnati, where it was unloaded and set up at the observatory. So this is a well-traveled telescope here. The tour was conducted by Mr. John Barnes here, who is really well-versed in the history and all the details. And he gave a wonderful tour, although he did make me a little bit nervous here when he tipped that big Clark telescope down about 25 degrees below the horizontal, and that priceless lens is just hanging there pretty much in outer space. But evidently they do it all the time. He wanted to show us the lens, and there it is. And this is truly a monument to the history of astronomy. It's the oldest professional astronomy in the observatory in the United States. It's well preserved and very professionally run by the people and the Friends of the Observatory in Cincinnati. If you ever get to Ohio, I highly recommend making a stop there. Go on their website and sign up for the tour. It is well worth your time. On the way back from Cincinnati, I made a little stop in Fayette, Missouri. I did have arrangements made to see the Morrison Observatory at the Central Methodist University in Fayette, Missouri. Unfortunately, my plans for a tour fell through at the last minute. The gentleman that was going to show it to me couldn't make it that morning. But I did get to walk around the outside and take a few pictures. Here's a picture from Wiki Commons of their 8-inch Clark telescope that they have in there. And once again, is beautifully preserved. They have a nice plaque on the outside, which gives a brief history of the observatory. And the building has this keystone over the entrance, which is 1875. The actual history of the telescope and the dome is that it was originally established by the Pritchett School Academy in Glasgow, Missouri, which is about 10 miles away, and it's a little river port on one of the rivers down there. In 1922, the Pritchett School went under financially, and everything sat vacant, gathering dust until 1926, when the assets of the observatory were acquired by the Central Methodist College. And in 1935, the telescope and the dome were moved 12 miles to their current location in Fayette, Missouri. So this building is that it's in dates back to the 1930s. I'm going to back up here a little bit again. Find the right button. Yeah, this building probably went up in the 30s, and they put the dome and built the observatory on top there, and the rest of the building was the residence for the observatory director. But that keystone was obviously moved from the original observatory because it's dated 1875, which was the time the observatory first went into business. So that pretty much catches you up with what I've seen to date, but I'm not quite done yet. I do have a bucket list of things that I would like to see yet. Some observing locations I'd like to return to. And of course, we're all looking forward to the next eclipse in 2024. And there's a whole list of observatories. This is by no means complete, but if there's a historic observatory out there, I want to go see it. And there on the bottom here is my website address, www.binocrane.com. You're welcome to visit there. And I have more details on all my observation that I've done across the country. I have a little observing journal in there, and also links to some of my other activities. So you're welcome to take a look. And that concludes my part of the presentation. So we're going to open up the floor here to other people to share. Dina told me that she has some pictures from Arecibo Observatory down in Puerto Rico that recently fell to its death. But I'd sure like to see that. So Dina, if you want to take over the screen sharing, I'm done with my part. Thank you.
Okay.
You have to stop sharing. Yeah. Okay.
I did it. Yeah, that's fine. Okay. All right. Now I'll start sharing my screen, and I will say that I have been, oh, why does it not want to play? Okay, here we go. When I was a little kid, I lived in a small town in Southern Oregon that Bill has actually visited. He posted a picture from a local laundry there on my Facebook page a while back. At any rate, when I was little, you could go out and you could see the Milky Way even in front of the house without trying to get this into full screen here. Hold on. There were no street lights or anything like that, so it was really easy to see. I've got Zoom interfering with what I want to see on.
Go to slideshow.
I can't get there because Zoom is in the way.
Oh, never mind. This is fine. We can see it.
I wanted it to be bigger. Anyway,
Okay.
Disregard this picture. Maybe fit to window. Nope. I'm going to stop share for just a second. Hold on. Okay, now let me go and do this in the correct order. Okay, all right. Then shows what I don't know really. So we would go outside and look at the night sky. We could see the Milky Way right out in front of the house, even though it was right in town.
You're not sharing.
I know, I'm working on it.
Okay.
I'm talking and at the same time. At any rate, boy, this is just not friendly. Just bear with me a minute, please.
No problem.
There we go. Okay, all right. Oh, it went back to that. Oh, well, okay. We're just gonna have to live with it like this, I guess. At any rate, so my interest in astronomy started at a really young age. I never really got to do anything with it other than pay attention in classes in school. I really enjoyed everything I could learn about astronomy there. But at any rate, I started doing things with it actually a little bit before I retired, probably around 2005. My sister and I were on a cruise of the Inland Passage of Alaska. The last stop on the way home was Victoria, British Columbia. And one of the shore excursions was to an observatory that had a 24-inch telescope. And I was so excited. I sent her off to Butchart Gardens with some other people, and I went to this observatory. And we got there before dark, so I wandered around the grounds, wandered around the gift shop, and finally, when they started the presentation, we all went upstairs and they had us sit on the floor, and I was puzzled because I'd already been to Chamberlain. Come to find out, there was no eyepiece on this telescope. It was fitted with a camera only. So I was very disappointed, but very happy to come back to Denver and to Chamberlain Observatory. Now this first picture, it doesn't look like an astronomical site, but it is in a location in Peru called Quirumiac. And Quirumiac is an archaeological site. There have been a lot of discoveries there, but there is this amazingly beautiful, very carefully whittled out of the rock moon calendar. That's what they've interpreted it as. They don't know how old it is, or they won't say how old it is. I found out in Peru that a lot of people will just shrug their shoulders and say, I don't know. So either they are not telling, or they are, they know, and, or they just plain don't know, a lot of the people there may not care too much about their own history. But at any rate, I don't know how this is supposed to work, but I was fascinated. I actually have a friend who is from Peru, and she didn't know about it. So I told her about it, showed her the picture, and the last time she went to Peru, she went and visited it. It's really a unique little site. So if you ever get to go, ask about going here. Then the next thing that I did was in 2012, I did not get pictures. I should have been more like Bill and taken pictures everywhere I went, but I went to Las Vegas to work for 6 months. And I went a couple of weeks early and drove about 200 miles north of Las Vegas to catch my first annular eclipse. And it was just beautiful. Found a place off the highway right on the midline to pull off. There was another car there, and there was a couple who were there to see the annular eclipse. And I had the protective stuff on the end of my binoculars, and gosh, it was really enjoyable. Then a few weeks later, in June, I think it was, there was a transit of Venus, and I was staying in a residence inn, and where I was working, I made everybody come out that afternoon and look through my binoculars at least twice. And then I posted a sign every, twice a week, they would have a free buffet, just finger food and cheap booze at the residence inn. And I posted a sign on the wall that said, come see the transit of Venus. Look for a woman with binoculars outside building A. And I had a bunch of people come out and look at the transit of Venus. They had no idea that that was possible. So I had a lot of fun with that. The next thing that I got to do wasn't until 2017 when I went to visit a friend in England. And I insisted that we go to the Royal Observatory at Greenwich. Now, these are not my pictures. I look through my phones and my GPS receiver, which takes great pictures, and my computer, and I could not find the pictures that I took that day. So these are from the internet, but this is the picture of the dome open at the Royal Observatory in Greenwich. And it was open while I was there. I was able to go upstairs and take a daytime tour in the observatory. And my friend and I hung out until everybody else had asked their questions and left so we could talk to the astronomers there. And that was just delightful. This is the telescope that is there. And I was stunned. The setup is so different than what we have at Chamberlain. So while they were talking about it, I was walking around, figuring out, okay, what controls the right ascension, and, what controls the declination. And that was a lot of fun. And I got some really good pictures, and I am really upset that I can't find them. But at any rate, I got to ask a lot of questions. And this telescope is a 26-inch aperture refractor, and it was actually moved twice. They decided at some point that it needed to be in a better location because, as you might recall, the weather in London is not great. So they had moved it to another location where the weather was better, but then a better telescope was built there, and they moved it back to the Royal Observatory in Greenwich. So it is a hugely historical instrument and a real joy to see. The outer edge of the lens has degraded a little bit, so they have it stopped down to 22 inches instead of 26. But on good nights, they still see beautiful things through it. The other main thing about going to Greenwich, and again, this is not my picture, is standing on the prime meridian, or what they thought was the prime meridian. This line comes out of the transit telescope room at the observatory and travels for quite some distance away from the observatory. But I had my handheld GPS with me, and it was telling me that the real 0 degree of longitude was, I want to say 80 to 100 feet. Don't quote me on that, but off to one side. And I remember getting pictures of me standing on the original median or meridian line, and also holding up my GPS showing that I was on the actual 0 degree line of longitude. It's quite a place, and in the summer it's very, very busy, but it is definitely worth a trip. So this is my favorite one of all time. In 2017 also, I had friends who were spending some time in Puerto Rico. And this was actually before the trip to Greenwich. They invited me to come, and I went, and it was April, and we had a wonderful time. Now, the reflective surface of the telescope is down here, and it's about 100 yards across. It's like a big round football field, or it was anyway. They have an outstanding visitor center, and we had docents tell us about everything. This is called the Gregorian Dome, so it's like the secondary. So the signal would bounce off the primary here and into the Gregorian, and then there were 2 or 3 mirrors in there. And then it would finally go to a computer, which would receive the radar radio signals and interpret them and produce images of things like asteroids that were going by the Earth. There's also, I think I'm blocking it here, I think it hangs down over here. but there is a transmitter for that radar. So they could transmit a signal out to space and then turn the transmitter off, turn the receiver on, and catch the signal as it came back from way out in the solar system and beyond. This is a way that the astronomers would use to get over to the Gregorian Dome and also to the top here. And this piece here could turn any way around and be moved a little bit in order to see more of the sky than you would think if it just stood still. Also, the Gregorian Dome could be moved along this curve from one side to the other. So it was extremely versatile. And the day that it came apart just broke my heart, but I was really, really grateful that I got to go and see it before that happened. And I'm really hopeful that the plans to build a bigger, better Arecibo radio observatory come to pass. Talk about being in the right place at the right time, though, getting to see it before that happened. The next few pictures are from my first total solar eclipse. I got to stay with this gentleman here in the black shirt, who is a sheriff's deputy for Scottsbluff, Nebraska. And he had phoned down to Chamberlain and wanted somebody to bring a telescope up and have a star party the night before the eclipse. So I rounded up a couple of friends and some telescopes, and we headed up there actually a couple of nights early. And this is the group that we had observing the eclipse that day. It was really wonderful. This is my cousin and his family. They drove up that morning to see it. He was like, "Oh, it's the first day of school. The kids can't miss." And I said, "Mark, it's the first day of school. They're not going to miss anything." So off they went and met us up there. It was great. Oh, and the road we were on was a long dirt road between two highways. And it was covered with people from all over the world. You can't see them in these pictures, but it was great. And my last picture, I just have to show you this. One of the guys in this picture who worked with the sheriff's deputy, he's also a sheriff's deputy, and he and his wife had 4 children. And they were really, really concerned about them getting eye damage. So they got the eclipse glasses, and their dad duct taped them around the back of their heads so that they would not lose any vision or eyesight during the eclipse, which I thought was really clever. And he didn't pull any hair either. I don't know how he did it, but it was great. Anyway, so that's my little bit on astrotourism. I have a lot of places I want to go. And I think it's one of the delightful things about the hobby is wherever you go, there's somebody who's looking at the sky. So I will stop my share and I will mute.
Well, thank you, Dina. Anybody else who want to share some of their experience? Phil, okay?
Okay,
You can share
okay.
screen?
I just unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, let me go to my screen, share my screen. And let's see, hit slideshow. Okay, first let me do a little bit of introduction. I joined the Denver Astronomical Society back in January because one of my daughters and her family moved to Lakewood. And so I wanted to learn about astronomy in Denver. And since then, I live in Austin, Texas, and we've made 4 trips to Lakewood already, and we're about to do another one. So that's why I joined up with the Denver Astronomical Society. Second thing I should tell you about is, even though I've been doing amateur astronomy for about 60 years now, I was a longtime employee of McDonald Observatory at the University of Texas. And so I worked 32 years in professional astronomy, and I've been lots of places all over the world in big observatories. But most recently, I've done a lot of astrotourism. So I put together a few slides to give you an example. I've actually done 5 talks on astrotourism. As some of you may have heard at the beginning, I've been a volunteer for over 10 years now in Black Canyon National Park. So I've done a number of talks for the Black Canyon Astronomical Society, which is centered in Montrose, Colorado. In any case, the 5 talks I've done are, one's about astronomy in Paris, France. The second's about other places in France. The reason we did those is my wife, who's now retired, taught French at the University of Texas for a long time. And for almost 20 years before the pandemic, led study abroad groups in France and spent about half the summer there. So I've spent a large amount of time in France since the year 2000. So the first 2 astrotourism talks I did were about France. I also did one about Chile. I also did one from London and included, Bath and Greenwich and other places around London, and plus a few others. So the first one I point out is, because I worked for McDonald for 32 years, they have a great visitor center, and I kind of wanted to plug it. But I was the project manager for building this new visitor center back in 2000 to 2002. And the thing I wanted to point out is that they largely shut down when the pandemic started, and they're reopening now somewhat, but they started doing virtual sky tours that are now on YouTube. So if you want to see some really nice, well done astronomy programs on YouTube, I recommend going to the McDonald Observatory virtual sky tours.
If I may jump in, Phil, we should mention that you will be the InReach speaker in 2 months, November 20th InReach. So Phil will be giving a similar presentation at that time.
That's correct. Yeah, the title of that talk is Memoirs of a Telescope Addict. And I actually just did that earlier this week for the club in Black Canyon. And it's kind of a journey through my history with telescopes, with all of the amateur things I've done in parallel with a lot of the things I did with big telescopes for McDonald and other adventures. So that'll be on November 20th. Okay, this next slide, I think probably my favorite talk was the first one I did. It was called Footloose Astronomer in Paris. And back in when we were in Paris for about 10 days with the students in May 2014, I decided to spend most of a week just exploring Paris, a lot of the historical astronomy sites that are there, historical things about a number of well-known astronomers. I did a whole talk about that. This is just one example. This is where Charles Messier's grave is in Père Lachaise Cemetery. And also in the upper right is the what is now the Clooney Museum in Paris. It is now the National Museum of the Middle Ages in Paris. Fabulous museum. Inside it has things like the unicorn tapestry. But that tower you see in the middle of the courtyard at the Clooney Museum is the tower upon which Charles Messier observed back in the 1760s, 1770s, and on for several more decades. The fun thing about this slide was when I found his grave at Père Lachaise, there was a little Sky and Telescope subscription thing that you find in the magazines. And so I took a picture of that. And about a couple of months later in Sky and Telescope, somebody had written a letter in and talked about back in the beginning of May, they'd gone to Paris and decided to leave a little memento there at Messier's grave. And I should have written a letter saying, well, I found it there. It was still there a month later, but I didn't. Okay, the next slide shows a couple of things from some of the other talks I've done. The one on England, I went to Bath to the Herschel Museum, which is quite fascinating. So the picture on the left is a replica of the telescope, 6-inch telescope that William Herschel used to discover Uranus in March 1781. The family still has the original. And in the right, on some other travels, I went to the Deutsches Museum in Munich, and the actual telescope that was used to discover Neptune in 1846 is on display there. That's the real telescope. And just for reference, you see a person standing below it to the right. That's a spectacularly interesting and beautiful telescope. Okay, the next one's kind of interesting. In all my travels through France for a long time, one of the things I started noticing was the French are particularly into art. in a number of places I discovered art and astronomy. So I started taking pictures of them. And the second talk I did about France, which is called Footloose Astronomer in France, I ended with a section on art and astronomy in France. The picture on the left is probably my favorite. And on the grounds of the observatory in Lyon, France, is a fairly large telescope that's basically obsolete, but a university project and in the art department with about 10 students took it over and decided to make a piece of art out of it. And you can see it there. It's pretty spectacular looking. The one in the upper right is in a big science museum in Paris that was built in the 1930s. So it has an Art Deco style and vibe to it. And that's the really beautiful entrance to the astronomy exhibits and kind of an Art Deco style. And the one on the lower right as an example is the original Starry Night by Vincent van Gogh, which is in the Orsay Museum in Paris. And I've also been to the place in Arles where he painted that and taken the picture, and you can see the similarity. Okay, also in 2017, my wife and I took the Sky and Telescope tour to Chile and went all over Chile and visited observatories. That was a really great trip. And so when I came back from that, I did an entire talk on astrotourism in Chile. This particular picture shows the European Southern Observatory at La Silla. And the next one of my favorite pictures, taken from Cerro Tololo in Chile. This is actually the main domes of the observatory are behind me, the big 4-meter telescope at Cerro Tololo, but there was a big bank of smaller telescopes down a little bit lower on the mountain with a view of the beginnings of the Andes Mountains behind it. So I've got a whole talk on astronomy in Chile. Also on that tour, we visited actually five, but mostly four of the astro tourist sites you can visit that had anywhere from 12 to 28-inch telescopes in view of the southern sky. This is one picture I took of, this is a 28-inch telescope at a place called SPACE, which stands for San Pedro de Atacama Celestial Experience, run by a Frenchman who used to work for a big observatory. And we had great observing of the southern sky from all of these places. And you can actually go as a tourist, fly into Santiago and then take a plane to northern Chile or central Chile near La Serena and visit some of these sites. The observing is fabulous. I think, and that's the end of my slides. So as I said, I've got five talks about astrotourism, 2 about France, 1 Chile, 1 England, and then the other one is about some places, including Peru. I've also been to Peru. I've also been to Italy and Germany, and so I have literally 400 or 500 slides of these kinds about astrotourism. So I'll end there, and if you have any questions, go ahead and ask.
Well, thank you, Phil. Are there any questions? Can you stop the sharing?
Yes.
Okay, then we can see everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, are there any questions to any one of the speakers? Or first of all, is there any other person who would like to share the screen? I don't see any hands.
Yeah, hi there.
Hi, Lisa. Okay.
I haven't figured out how to raise my hand. I can do applause, but I haven't raised hand yet.
Okay, but you need to share screens. Do you know how to share screens?
Yeah, that one I saw.
Okay.
Hang on a minute while I go get well, that's all right. I'll go ahead and share it now. Okay, screen. Ah, there we go. Okie doke. More in line with Bill's talk about historic observatories, I think he'll, this here is the 2013 Denver Observer, April of 2013, back when we were doing paper newsletters. Patty Kurtz was our, here we go. Yeah, I went to the 2012 eclipse, which was at sea. There we go. That is the picture that I think Bill would like. Yeah, okay, the caption is okay. That is the Cook telescope in Wellington, New Zealand. I'm sorry, I'm trying to get it together here. The local club there that takes care of it is an absolutely fun bunch of guys. A week later, after viewing the eclipse at sea, the ship came back to Auckland, and I went bungee jumping, and the young guys, 27 years old at most, had been to Chamberlain Observatory on one of our public nights. So we had plenty of connection there. But at any rate, if you want to copy that URL, you're welcome to read the whole rest of it. I've got more pictures of the Cook telescope at Carter Observatory in Wellington, but I haven't been able to find them on any of my memory sticks. I know I've got them on a micro SD card somewhere, but it would take me too long to find them. So yeah, just go visit one of these DAS pages if you want to learn more about the whole entire trip. But for Bill, I knew that you would probably get a kick out of that, get a kick out of the Cook telescope. Right behind it there's a gantry, very much like it's half the size of Chamberlain. The gantry in the back there is half the size of the gantry at Chamberlain. They were just, they've got a transit scope there. The Greenwich Observatory started offering time signals for free in 1905. Right after this observatory was completed. So that's just like Chamberlain's story. It's from the late 1800s. And
can you enlarge the picture a bit?
I wish I could.
Okay.
Yeah, I wonder, let's see if nope, I can't. No, you'd have to just go visit the.
Okay, no problem.
Yeah. But at any rate, I thought Bill might like to learn a little bit about that particular observatory. It's really, really neat and is just exactly like Chamberlain, except half the skies. They've got a Grubb manual clock drive, and it was interesting to see that as well. So that's it for me.
Oh,
Let me stop
okay.
share.
Okay, thank you, Lisa.
Sure. Everybody got the URL, right? Or you want me to
put it
back?
on the share. You can put it on the share if you like, or the chat if you like.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's a good idea. Let me put it on chat.
I don't know if you heard me, Lisa, but thanks for sharing that. That is a nice old scope. I'll look into it further.
Yeah, sure.
Any other questions, comments?
Donald Lynn has his hand.
Yeah, first, yeah, Don Lynn. Unmute first.
There we go. I only had to hit unmute 3 times before it listened to me. I wanted to just add a little bit on top of Dina's visit to Greenwich. I have also been to Greenwich, and highly recommend visiting there. The reason that your GPS didn't register 0 is because in 1984, they had a conference to try to decide what to do about the various standards for longitude that didn't match, because a lot of them had been from the 18 and 1900s. And well, what's known as the British Ordnance Standard, which says, by golly, Greenwich is 0.0 degrees longitude. Well, they lost out in the conference by about 100 yards. And I was aware of this before I went to Greenwich, and found in my GPS unit in the menu, you can turn it to British Ordnance Standard instead of the GPS 84 standard. So I did. I switched my GPS unit over to that standard, and let's see, I'm trying to share my screen. And of course, it doesn't have the one I want here, but we can get to it. Oh, there it is. And there is a GPS unit with switched to the British Ordnance Standard and reading 000000. And I'm standing, well, I'm not standing exactly on the line because there was actually a line of people who were trying to get their pictures on the line, but I was standing within a few feet of it and took this picture. I hope you can read the zeros down there on the bottom of the GPS unit.
It's a little bit on the small side, but that was very close to what my picture looked like. I had a yellow GPS back then. Oh, there, that it is. Yeah, good, good. So yeah, I always wondered, Don, because I thought, okay, straight down is straight down no matter where you are. And I couldn't figure out why it would be off. I mean, and
well, yeah, well, back in the 1800s, they did not, they could not measure longitude well enough down to the foot.
okay.
And so the US and Hawaii and China and Australia and like dozens of other places, each had made their exact standard, and they measured longitude from their standard to the foot. And then when GPS was on the horizon, they said, hey, we better do better than this if we're going to have a worldwide system. And they had that conference and said, okay, this grid that we defined best matches all of them around the world, but it missed the British Ordnance Standard by 100 yards, give or take. So
Okay.
that's the rest of your story.
That makes more sense to me than anything I have been told by anybody else. Thank you.
Now, I also have a few other comments, that not about Greenwich, but all my pictures from them are on film, so I'm just going to say them. So I grew up in Southern California, and I noticed that Bill's list had several bucket list items in Southern California. And in fact, I highly recommend Griffith Observatory, which is on that list. My grade school actually had field trips to Griffith, and that's where I started becoming an astronomer, was the grade school field trips. They claim that the 12-inch telescope at Griffith has had more eyes looking through it at the stars than any other telescope in the world. There's millions of people who've been through there. But they have a huge science and astronomy set of exhibits inside. It's well worth going to. I have also toured Mount Wilson. They have a little museum there with history and pictures. It's well worth going to Mount Wilson if you're there. Oh, by the way, Griffith is still closed for COVID, so wait a few months before you go there. I've also been to Lick. That's well worth seeing also. And Kitt Peak, which isn't in California, but close enough. I drove there, and it's just astounding to see all the telescopes on top of Kitt Peak. So I highly recommend those items that were in Bill's bucket list. So that's about all I have to say. So I'll stop sharing.
Thank you, Don. I see Bill has his hands up. Bill?
Yeah, I'm trying to get there. Am I unmuted now?
Yes.
Yeah, I wanted to ask Phil if he caught his Easter egg in my presentation.
I think so. You
You
mentioned.
know what I'm talking about, the mural in Gunnison on the side of the building?
Phil?
I don't actually remember that one. You mentioned an Easter egg.
Oh,
I thought I
okay,
saw it, but
yeah.
I can't remember.
As you drive into Gunnison on US 50, can you share screen share with me for just a second, Dina?
Oh, okay.
You are free to share, Bill.
Yeah, you should be able to share. I've got it to allow participants.
Okay. Yeah, it's this picture right here. That's as you go into Gunnison, there's a mural on the side of a building of I think it's a carpet company.
Yeah, okay. I think I've seen that. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Now I think I remember that.
And I actually stopped there and went in the building. I thought there was going to be something to do with astronomy in there. Well, it's basically just a carpet and flooring store, but they evidently donated or leased out the side of the building so the Gunnison Observatory people could paint a mural there. And that's how I actually found out that there was an observatory in Gunnison, which should also be on my bucket list because I plan on visiting there. That's a day trip almost.
Is that just a block or two west of the main north-south street?
It's
Just a little
on the,
west of the main
it's on the
street?
west. It's on the west end of town as you go.
Yeah,
into town.
I'm pretty sure I've seen that and probably taken a picture of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there you go. There's your Easter egg.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments? You can stop sharing, Phil.
Got it.
Or Bill, yeah.
Bill,
Yes, John,
question for Bill.
go ahead, John.
One of the things I always wonder about is how you transport a telescope, like particularly down a bumpy road in New Mexico or something like that. You were showing that you had a Dobsonian looking like it was suspended on some mattresses or something like that. Did you ever have trouble keeping the mirrors in alignment? How'd you deal with that, or did you
Well, not at all.
work with it every time you got it out?
Yeah, I do have a laser collimator that I would straighten things up, but actually it took the road pretty well. Those trucks are actually not as rough as riding in a pickup truck. I mean, they all have air ride suspension, and I had it up in the upper bunk, so it was sitting on a mattress, and I had it secured up there with bungee cords, so it survived pretty well. And actually later on, I changed my my style. I had it mounted upright, straight upright. I figured that would be better for the mirror, and I found out a way to secure it in the corner of the sleeper area, and I used that. But no, I never had any problems. But it's an old Orion Skywatcher, so it's a pretty tough piece of equipment there.
Okay. Well,
I think earlier I heard Jack trying to get a word in edgewise. Was that you, Jack?
Yeah, I put a little squeak in the chat. I just wanted to tell Bill that Palomar, Lick, McDonald, Chabot, Mount Wilson have got to be visited. That I was raised back there in the what we used to call Sludge Gulch, Southern California. So yeah, I used to frequent all those places. And I got an interesting phone call about a year out of high school. I got a call asking me if I wanted to be a staff member at the Griffith Observatory. And I said, wait a minute, Joe, you're pulling my leg. And this went on for like 15 minutes. I kept telling the guy, you're pulling my leg. Well, it turned out it was for real. So yeah, I was hired on as a museum guide for a couple of years, and then ended up as a planetarium presenter at Griffith. Kept that for 10 years. Really hated to give it up, but the 2,000-mile road trip out there from here to give planetarium shows, I figured it was a bit much.
okay.
Mehmet?
There are no
There-
other questions, I guess.
You had one.
Dina, you have something?
No, I was just going to remind you that you put a question in the chat.
Oh, yes, yes, yes. Well, actually, my question to Bill was whether, since he completed the Messier objects, whether you got your certificate from the Astronomical League.
Oh, yes, I did. I got my certificate, my pen, and I went on to also get the binocular Messier program completed.
Good, good, good. Do you intend to do other such observing programs?
I'm kind of looking at a few of them. I'm interested in the Galileo's toes, especially now that Jupiter is gracing the sky all night long. That's the transit, occultation, eclipse, and shadow observations. And it's 32 observations, which sounds like a piece of cake, but boy, you got to time them just right.
Right. Okay, thank you. Dina, I think we have completed this in reach. I think it was a lot of interest, and I'm glad we had lots of interaction. And what, 4 or 5 people sharing their experiences. That's great. Looks like on November 20th, we will have a similar, but from a different perspective, a presentation by Phil. And we may have similar, maybe screen sharing, Phil, at that time. Don't you think?
I'll be ready.
Good.
Excellent.
And anybody wants to say anything else before we complete? No?
Oh,
In that
hello, nice to meet you. Oh, and nice to meet you too, John. See what you look like. Yeah, do you have any more answers for the Gunnison Observatory? I put a little bit in the chat, but since you're the Montrose guys, when I was there last, I got the impression that the Gunnison Observatory has the equipment but not the people. Montrose Club has the people but not an observatory. And I'm trying to remember what his name was. It was at least 10 years ago or so. Do you know anything about the Gunnison Observatory that you wanted to share?
You're
I
asking,
can speak to that a little bit. They have a 30, I believe it's a 30 or 32 inch telescope. It's located, I don't know, 3 or 4 miles southwest of town. And the last time I went through there and looked at it, before the pandemic, I think they were still doing programs. They may be short of people, but they have a really nice setup as far as I can tell.
Yeah, Robin and I went there in 2019. They have an excellent program.
right. I actually thought that Ron would share a few charts about his solar eclipse observations, but Ron, do you have anything to say?
Well, as folks were going through their discussions and presentations about places they've been, I scribbled a list on a tablet here next to my laptop and realized, I've got quite a few places I've been to as well. And I don't have the pictures on this laptop, but I've got pictures from the 2006 eclipse in Libya. My wife and I went on. It was a sky and telescope of eclipse, a 2-week trip across the Mediterranean, and had a bunch of the usual touristy stuff, and then observing the totality from the northern Sahara Desert in Libya when the country was opened up to Western tourism for about a 2-year stint, and that was a lot of fun. That was my second total solar eclipse. But I've got a lot of other things on here. One that I especially liked was a private visit to Lowell Observatory. A mutual friend was an engineer down there several years ago, and a buddy and I went down there, got some private time on the big 24-inch refractor at night, and the guy took us into the room where the original glass plates that Clyde Tombaugh used to discover Pluto were, and he pulled the plates out of the cabinet and said, here they are. And I got to hold the original plates and okay, and handed them back very quickly, because that would have not been fun to drop or something. But that was a really, really good experience.
Good. Maybe you should have your charts available for one of the future in reach, and you can share some of those as well, Ron.
A lot of pictures from the Libya trip, but most of these other places I've been, like the Greenwich Observatory and other places, I've never taken pictures. I've got some pictures from Stonehenge, but a lot of these other places I just went to visit, went on business trips or whatever, and didn't bother to take pictures for. Well, in hindsight, I regret that now, but
yeah.
oh well.
So Bill did a good job capturing, logging his observations. I think that was great, Bill.
Thank you.
So, well, maybe time to say good night, and thank you very much for all of you. Oh, I have something else, Lisa.
Good job.
Lisa, your hand
Yes,
is up.
Yes, hello. Here, let me put my video on so John can see what I look like.
Oh,
Come on, start video. There we go. Hello.
okay, good. Well, have a good night, all
Look
of
like
you.
Dina, basically.
So we'll stop here. And the next InReach, by the way, is when is the next InReach?